There's times where humor belongs and fun belongs, and there's times where it can build up a team and bring a team together and really invest in the team that is going to pay long-term dividends. Like a hammer, it can be used to build or it can be used to break down. And you can break down members of your team. And not only break down that member, but everybody seeing you break down that member of your team, it's going to break that relationship too. Everything we go back to, trust, character, integrity, that goes against that.
Welcome to Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader.
And I'm Justin Hamrick. I'm thrilled to have you join us as we explore what truly makes great leaders. Tom, what topic are we delving into today?
Today, I was thinking that we would really dig into a topic that might surprise some, and that is the role having fun plays in successful leadership. How does incorporating fun into your leadership style make you more effective? Stick around and find out. Justin, today we're tackling an often overlooked but essential element of leadership: fun. Fun might not be the first thing you think of when discussing leadership, but it's a vital ingredient for success. It boosts morale, it strengthens relationships, and it even improves performance.
Tom, that's right. Leaders who know how to incorporate fun create environments where people thrive. Fun isn't just about games or humor or corporate pizza parties, and it's not about being goofy. It's about fostering a culture where people feel energized and connected. I think it's an essential characteristic of leadership. It's obviously an underrated trait and one that's tough to do well. So many otherwise good leaders get this wrong. They either use sarcasm that's derogatory and really don't hit the nail on the head. But today, we're going to explore how to do that effectively. But I imagine some of our listeners out there are feeling skeptical about incorporating fun into what they're doing because it seems like it's unprofessional or unleader-like, especially in certain organizations. So before we get too far into it, let's do what we always do on the science of leadership. Let's define what we're talking about. So Tom, when we talk about fun in leadership style, what are we really talking about?
You're right, Justin. And I think it's important. We always try to clarify what we're talking about. And so clarifying today's topic definitely is important. As you mentioned, I think when we're talking about having fun, we're not really talking about clowning around or making everything a joke. We don't want to conflate having fun with irresponsibility or foolishness or things of that nature. Certainly, as leaders, we undoubtedly have important roles and we need to take those roles seriously. But people are depending on us to lead the way to achieving the overall goal. Yet, I think we don't have to do that in a way that's stifling or rigid and things of that nature. So really at the same time, while we need to be serious, that doesn't mean that we can't have fun or the people we're leading can't have fun while we're doing it. The two aren't mutually exclusive. So as we think about defining what fun in the workplace, if we think of it that way, really looks like, there was this paper in 2009 where Eric Lamb and Michael Meeks defined workplace fun as playful, social, interpersonal, recreational, or task activities intended to provide amusement or pleasure. So I think we could say what we're really talking about here with having fun is creating this sort of atmosphere that fosters enjoyment of the moment that you're in, even when that moment is particularly challenging, right? So it's not
Mm,
just fun for fun's sake, and it's not that every moment's going to be the best and not hard or challenging, but creating fun in those moments that can be challenging. And that may be through lightheartedness or gratitude or shared victories or things of that nature. It's really finding those instances of joy, meaning, and satisfaction in the work and fostering that environment where people feel energized, engaged, and really invested. What's unprofessional about that?
I think that's really helpful to clearly differentiate from having fun to being irresponsible or unprofessional or even like behavior that would consider to undermine your leadership. That is not what we're going for. And we're not saying that
Sure.
leaders shouldn't be professional, they shouldn't be responsible, and the fun cannot undermine the character. It really supports it. Like it really tells your team what your character is. And as I'm hearing you sort of define this and that paper talking about what it means, what I'm hearing is connection. And we've talked about this before. You need to care about your team. And this is really part of that. It's that you're not a robot,
Mm.
that you are able to connect even during stressful times with your team and being light, fun, all those things you talk about. That really is part of it. It certainly is different to invigorate and inspire than to be goofy and irresponsible. Now that we've got an idea of what we're talking about in terms of a definition, do you have an example that would help demonstrate this to our listeners of what it looks like in a leadership role to have fun in the midst of work and in the midst of leading others?
Sure. I have a bunch really. We can think of all sorts of things like things from medical training, being a resident and medical student. Those come to mind when talking about challenging situations and also having fun. But one that really jumps right to mind, and those who have listened to our previous episodes will be familiar with Rick Loudon and the impact he had on my life and still has on my life. But Rick is a great example, I think, of a leader who always made it fun. So whatever we were doing, he made it fun. I worked with Rick at Oak Ridge National Laboratory in the early 1990s, and our offices and labs were in what was called the metals and ceramics facility. This was a large, relatively
Pottery.
new building. Okay, that was built in the late 1980s. It probably cost at that time 50 to $100 million to
Mm,
build, and so it was a really high-end, scientific building where we did all this research. And Rick had this, it was particularly funny thing that he would do. And Rick is not the tallest guy. So he's I think Rick's probably somewhere around 5'7", 5'8" maybe. And and so we were walking along through this building, right? And if we were walking along and Rick would trip or catch his toe on the floor, he'd stop and he'd turn, and he'd point to the floor and he'd say, "There's a high spot there. We need to mark it so that no one else trips." And then as if he were some sort of self-appointed safety officer, and I don't know where he'd gotten this tape, but he had this yellow black, striped tape, that he would go get, this sort of barricade tape, and he would make these big X's on the floor and leave them there, for safety's sake, right? So consequently, throughout this multi-million dollar cutting edge high-tech research facility, you would see Rick's X's, each representing those so-called high spots. And that was fun. And honestly, it was a bit ridiculous, among other things that Rick would do. But it showed every member on the team that Rick didn't take himself too seriously, and it was okay to have fun. Even when we were doing really important stuff for the Department of Defense and so forth. We had a great time, and our team was exceptional, I think, as a result, right? We developed this camaraderie and esprit de corps. And so as a result of that, we were able to get so many projects done ahead of schedule, which is not common in a government facility. And we developed a number of innovative materials and applications for those. And I think it was directly related to Rick's leadership and his ability to find fun in what was otherwise serious and potentially really mundane work. So that's one that really jumps to my mind and just makes me like I have a lot of great memories of that.
I love that. It's so true that teams that have fun together have greater camaraderie, which we know increases team performance. As you're telling that story, I just hear connection. Like I can see the two of you walking down and you're going to some important meeting. That happens, and instantly you're like two friends. Like you're just two friends, not really goofing off, but you got to see a little bit of his personality and character without him undermining his own leadership characteristics, integrity. I think that's so hard to do. It's a great example of how he was able to do that and to bring your team together and to bring their performance really to the highest level.
Yeah. And another thing, just as you're saying that, it comes to mind is this idea, fun. A lot of times we think about fun, we think about humor and that sort of thing. Rick was the object of the joke, right?
Mm,
He didn't make anybody else the object of good leaders never make somebody else the butt of the joke. As a leader, if you're gonna make a joke, either nobody is impugned or you're the butt of the joke, and typically, I think it works best if you're the butt of the joke, right? If you start making other people the butt of the joke, that really undermines your leadership. So I think that's something that's a good point, think about how might we undermine ourselves. That's one way that I see all the time. People trying to make jokes and they just undermine themselves and it doesn't go well. But anyway, so that's one of mine. What about you? Do you have a story that showcases kind of how having fun or why having fun is valuable and accomplishing the mission or things like that?
yeah, I think of one of my mentors that sort of demonstrated fun in their leadership style, and it was almost hand in hand with sort of what you were just talking about, was their demonstration of humility. They were in a leadership role, but not completely separate. They were able to have a characteristic of humility that was so important in their own leadership. It was one of my attendings in the ICU when I was an ICU fellow, Robert Spear, and he's a guy you would describe as sort of an eclectic man, like, and he would often use humor, usually in the form of a very odd analogy or story to make a point, usually a very valuable teaching point. And sort of as you pointed out, he wasn't derogatory. He didn't use sarcasm at someone else's expense. He didn't make someone else on the team isolated, separated, put down so that he could make a point. He would just usually come up with these very strange things that you wouldn't connect and sort of use that analogy to really drive the point home. And while these stories and analogies usually seemed ludicrous and were filled with hyperbole and they often sort of I just had no idea where he was coming up with them, that would really solidify a point. These stories and their humor stuck with me much longer than if he had not used that. And he could have been critical about certain decisions or plans of care, but instead was able to interject humor, often at his own expense, to make a point. While sometimes this may be done, like as you said, with sarcasm and to the detriment of others, humor and fun may be used to help solidify a point without belittling others. And I think that's a really important point because I do agree when people get this wrong, a lot of times they don't feel comfortable about their own limitations. They don't have are comfortable with their own humility and they sort of point the humor, the sarcasm to somewhere else, and that's when not only is it not helpful to the team, but it can be a detriment, and that's a real tough thing to get right, and I think that's probably the real crux of this whole thing is not only using humor, fun, but using it correctly.
Yeah, it is it can be certainly a double-edged sword in that way. We need to be very thoughtful about how we're wielding it. So, I think that's a great example from, your days as a trainee. It shows the value of what I'm hearing is thoughtfulness with regard to how he was bringing the fun to that environment. And again, that's an ICU setting with children, just for our listeners, where it's serious. I mean, we're talking about life and death here, and yet even in those very serious moments and contexts, you can still have fun, and that's important for developing that environment where I think the magic really happens. So this idea of having fun was, something that actually came up a lot amongst the four-star generals and admirals when I talked with them. For those who haven't been in the military, and you think about battles and war and all that sort of stuff, it may seem sort of crazy, but then if you've watched enough movies, Hollywood gets a few things right when it comes to military, and certainly the aspect of fun and humor and that sort of thing does show up. So over 40% of those four stars that I talked to discussed fun in a direct way, the importance of having fun, or they shared stories that showcased it. And so I think that's valuable. It's also worth noting that it really nests within this larger concept that we're hitting on here of building relationships. And as you look at the science of these things, that really fits very well for the science. It turns out, I think, that having fun can be thought of as a relationship building secret weapon. And I think that's based on neuroscience. When we have fun, our brains actually release these neurotransmitters that have significant positive effects. Among those, there are a number of neurotransmitters that actually are released when we're having fun, happy, enjoying ourselves, and that. But the three that I would hit on are dopamine, oxytocin, and endorphins. And these help us enjoy and experience fun and pleasure and so forth, and they also foster relationships with others. So for our listeners who haven't had the fun or the suffering or whatever we might say, to have gone through neuroanatomy and physiology like you and I did back in the day, dopamine is our body's biggest reward hormone, and that's why it's actually often referred to as the pleasure hormone. It's the key driver that keeps us feeling good and helps us feel better. Conversely, oxytocin is often referred to as the love hormone or the bonding chemical. It's instrumental. A lot of it is released around the time of a mother's delivery, and it's important for breast and lactation, let down, and so forth. But it really drives the bond that occurs between a mother and her newborn. So oxytocin actually causes us to feel more related to other people. So when we're having fun with others, oxytocin is released and it makes us feel like we know them, we can relate to them, and we like them. And so finally, like dopamine, endorphins trigger a sense of pleasure, and they also decrease our anxiety and improve our mood. You may have heard of endorphins in the context of what's known as the runner's high. So if you run long enough, typically folks would say 7 to 8 miles, you start beginning to feel this really pleasurable state. And so that endorphin release comes from that, and it also releases when we're having fun with someone else, and that helps us feel relaxed and happy around them, and that actually contributes to us being much more likely to want to form a relationship with that person. So taking together all this neuroscience, if you will, having fun is a powerful tool for building relationships, and using it to do so is a hallmark of excellent leadership. So, any thoughts on that, Justin?
And not only that, obviously, I mean, we've all been in sort of situations, whether they've been stressful or fun has been interjected, where we really feel a lot of camaraderie. The most shocking thing, and this is why I think your research with a lot of high up people in the military is so important. That if you have asked me before this episode, do high ranking generals, admirals consider fun? One of the things I would have said no. It just Like, and probably is a little bit of the misperceptions, misconceptions of it, of being in the military, of like the generals, are set apart. They are not there to have fun. They're to instruct, to reprimand, to discipline. But it's really interesting that so many of their stories incorporate fun into them, that they've got that. Like, that's just shocking to me. And really sort of, even in that situation, even in that sort of regimented hierarchy of the military, that fun, not just in the soldiers that are at the same level, but in a leader to a mentee or someone who is being led, how important fun is. I was wondering if you had an example of one of the stories that one of the generals or admirals gave you to sort of elucidate that a little more. Like, I'm still having a hard time, like, how would that happen? And, when you're
Yeah.
so high ranking and, like you said, in charge of people's lives and safety and national
Mhm.
security, where that would play out.
Yeah, so and I share, a lot of those stories in, in the book that's forthcoming, but the person I think of who really hammered this the most, and a lot of them talked about it, but was General Conway, General James Conway, who was the commandant of the Marine Corps, so the highest ranking Marine. And most of the time folks don't think of Marines as being fun per se.
Yeah.
They're, all business, but he told about a time when I believe he was a captain at the time, and he took over this platoon, and they were kind of the bad news bears, if you will,
Mhm.
of the base and so on, and so he was tasked with trying to get them into shape, and so he told about how he went about that, and he created this culture, really. I mean, it's a master class in what it looks like to create a successful culture, but a really important player in that was his ability to bring in fun, right? And so he said, there's always something funny going on in the military. All you got to do is look. And so he would go around, and at night they would be out on these exercises. And so different Marines would be gathered around in circles around campfires and things. And there would always be somebody grandstanding as a comedian, and he just said they were just hilarious. But he told about they would get in, they would have these basically who's the tough man, right? Where they would battle each other and throw each other out of the ring. And this was part of their training. And so he had a couple of apparently really sizable Marines, like just enormous, the kind of person you don't want to meet in a dark alley, you know, who always seemed to win. And one was named Bubba. And the Marines would start chanting, and they would say CO against Bubba, right? So the commanding officer. So at that time, Captain Conway, right? They were going to fight. And Conway just said, he got his rear end just beat, but it was in this context of having fun and being on some level the butt of the joke, if you will,
Mhm.
um, and how that just really helped him bond with those Marines in a really great way. And so that's one that comes to mind.
Man, that it really touches on a lot that we've already talked about. Of, he didn't belittle someone else. He could have been like, oh, a person that always loses that contest. Oh, pointing them out or isolating them, but that's not what he was. He was able to take his own humility in something he knows he's going to get destroyed in, but it didn't undermine his leadership. It's not like it took away from him. It actually enhanced that. And that, in all of this, I think that's the difficult thing to do. You think of some people that just want to do a checkbox and they're like, oh, we're going to have fun. Oh, let's go do a corporate training session or a bonding session. We're going to go out to a ropes course. That's not what we're talking about. Like, oh, let's have a pizza party. There's ways to do this poorly, but to do it correctly is exactly what you talked about, which is you really are enhancing your own character in that it strengthens the humility that they see. They see you more as a person, but also it brings the team together in so many different ways. Do you have any more on the science of it, and
Yeah.
how fun sort of helps this?
Yeah, I mean, so if we, following on this idea of the neuroscience, a lot of investigators have found that having fun at work actually results in improvements in numerous important factors for success. So it's associated with increased employee motivation. It fosters strong relationships, which we've already talked about with regard to neuroscience. It increases trust, and improves camaraderie and teamwork. I think it shouldn't be surprising then that having fun in the workplace also is related to greater innovation and productivity. So these things have all been shown in various studies. What's more, workplace fun also enhances both physical and psychological wellness. So, specifically from a mental health perspective, having fun at work decreases stress,
Mm.
decreases emotional exhaustion and burnout and depression. And again, we've mentioned this in a number of episodes here on the science of leadership. Those are things that we're all dealing with across all professional domains. We're dealing with exhaustion, burnout, disengagement, those sorts of things. So having fun can be something that's very simple to do, does not require extra money or funding, but it can actually have a major impact. It improves morale, as we've already talked about, during challenging circumstances. It also has been shown to lower absenteeism. So I think any of us who would fancy ourselves as leaders would do well to harness these really positive effects of having fun.
That makes a lot of sense, and especially now that sort of I'm thinking about it and hearing all about this, it makes sense of why in the most of stressful situations, working in a hospital, paramedic, firefighter, police officer, military, why fun is so important because those are the ones that are probably highest risk to burnout, stress-related physical conditions, stress-related mental because the stakes are so high.
Yeah,
And while I think if you just quickly thought about it and reflect, you're like, "Oh, yeah, that's the place you can't have fun. It's too serious." Those are the places where it's almost imperative to have that, appropriately to have it. Now, I don't
sure.
mean like to detract someone from the serious nature of that, but also to enhance it. Like you were saying, it would really be a desirable trait of leadership, especially in those. I think we've all experienced when we're having fun, we perform better, we get along with people better, things just work better. Like we are a higher functioning team. It's no different in sports. You see
Right.
the
Yeah.
sports teams that really work well together, they're out there having fun. The winning teams are not the ones that are bickering on the sidelines. Like,
Right.
they're out there having fun. Now, is it the chicken or the egg? Are they having fun because 'cause they're winning, or are they winning because they're having fun? I would say the ones that have fun are the ones that are performing high at a higher level. So, let's get to what we always get to in the science of leadership. We talked about, what the definition is, the science behind it, but let's give our listeners some practical ways that we can foster fun among those we lead, as well as within ourselves, and how to do it correctly, how to avoid those sort of pitfalls of doing it wrong and actually detracting from your team and your leadership.
I mean, I've seen it myself. There's so many ways, it's not a one size fits all, certainly.
Mm.
And there's so many ways that we can promote fun, as an environment or a culture on a team or in an organization where we're trying to lead. I think to some degree it depends on your own leadership style, what you're comfortable with, what works for your team or your operational context. Certainly, you want it to be authentic because if not, I'm suddenly in this moment reminded of Rick Moranis's character in Ghostbusters. That dude, I don't know if you remember him, but
Oh,
he
yeah.
was this accountant, right, who becomes the keymaster. And anyway, but he tried so hard to have fun, right? But it was just off, and it just didn't work, right? When he's having his party at his place and all that,
And
and
he's telling people about their tax returns.
right,
"Hey, you you
exactly.
you can
Hey,
deduct
you
this."
right, buy a whatever it was, like 1,000 Bayer aspirin, and you can get it a lot cheaper if you do it that way or whatever, right? Like, he was trying to have fun, he was just off target, and so it's possible to try and be off target, so it's gotta be authentic. You gotta be able to do it in a way that really works for you. So I think that's really important to keep in mind. That said, I think there are certain things that can help and that we can do somewhat universally, at least as I've thought about this. I can share the ones that I tend to use most. I think first, humor is critical. I tend to make a lot of jokes. Admittedly, I have a pretty dry sense of humor that requires people to be paying attention to what I'm saying and kind of be on some degree of the same wavelength, and that can be risky. But I make a lot of jokes. And so I think it's hard to beat humor for promoting fun. Of course, we want to keep it clean. We want it to be respectful. We want to be professional, and we don't need to be deviating into things that could impugn people, as we said, or could target people or anything like that. That's not what we're talking about here. Um, but humor is a great, great option when it comes to having fun if you do it well. Also, as I mentioned, don't make other people the butt of the joke unless it's yourself, obviously. So as a leader, you got to steer clear of inside jokes, right? Because inside jokes create barriers. They
Mm,
create barriers between members of your team. If you and I have an inside joke, that may be great and fun for us, but then if somebody else is outside the joke and we're joking and having a fun time, they're left out.
yeah,
And
creates
that actually
division.
can dissolve that camaraderie unintentionally, right? So I think you want everyone to be having fun together. So when we keep our part of our team outside of that joke, that I think that just doesn't work very well. So that's something to keep in mind. A second thing, I try hard to be an encourager, what I would call an encourager, and somebody who is trying to give people recognition for good things that they've done, for contributing to the team's success, and especially when it's hard, when things are
So
going hard, coming alongside somebody. Hey, I really appreciate you doing this and naming whatever it is that they're doing. So I try to be an encourager because when people feel appreciated and encouraged, then it is more fun, I think, right? Like, you can have fun if you know that people are appreciating you, and they respect it what you're trying to do. So I found that sincere encouragement, though it doesn't carry a banner of, "Hey, this is fun," in a sense, it promotes an environment where fun actually can take place more easily, if that makes sense. So I think that doing those things is really valuable and translates to having fun, while we're doing it. The third thing that I try to do, I try to promote something unique and special about each person on my team. So this could be celebrating some talent that they have, or perhaps stemming from my military experience, giving people a call sign, if you will, or a nickname, like the boss. Or I had one person that I worked with, and and her name was reminded me of an MTV DJ, or VJ, I guess they were called back in the '80s, right? Julie Brown. This was not the person's name, but she was Downtown Julie Brown on MTV, right? And so this other person's name ended in Brown, right? And so I called her DT for Downtown. That was just the nickname I came up with her, but it was a, sort of a special way to have fun, throw back to '80s VJs on MTV, and so forth. And also sometimes it's calling people by their last name. Again, hearkening to whether it's sports or military experience that I had, where that is just this, it carries this special kind of connotation, in that regard. So I should, as I've been doing, I guess, clarifying, no one gets a nickname that's derogatory. You
Mm,
know, you don't
mhm.
you don't call you don't make fun of somebody's weight, or whatever it may be. Let's don't do that, right? Um, we don't want something that they don't appreciate. They have to appreciate it. If they don't, then you're destroying things. You're making it not fun, right? Like, it's no fun to be called names that you don't want to be called. So, so those are three things that I do, that quite often, and I think that they all contribute to a fun, workplace environment. Among others, there are a lot of other things I do, but those are three that I do. What about you? You have any, that you've seen or that you use to really create fun among teams?
Yeah, I think humor and camaraderie are essential parts of the team, especially one that is high functioning, high stress, high risk environments. I think of the military, I think of the ICU, I think of critically ill children. I think in that you need to have some element of humor and fun just to keep everyone sane, but you have
Yeah.
to do it correctly. It can't be done in a time where it detracts from the focus or the serious nature of it, but it's got to be in a time where it sort of brings the team together, and I think that is just so, so important.
I mean, as I've thought about what you do, right? So some of the people that are listening may have some understanding of what pediatric cardiac anesthesia is, but for those who don't, I mean, Justin's major skill set and job a lot of times is to be the person who takes a child whose heart is malformed, and often extraordinarily malformed, with very delicate, what we call physiology. So a lot of room for screwing up and things going wrong. And his job is to take that child and to administer anesthesia to be able for that child to undergo congenital heart surgery, extraordinarily complex and lengthy procedures. So he's got to put that kid to sleep, keep the kid alive during about as traumatic of a physiologic event as one could possibly have, and wake them back up so that they're in a normal situation. So it doesn't get much more high stakes in my mind, okay, than that. And yet here you are, right, saying, yeah, fun is really, really important for that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime I've talked to somebody that works in the ICU, in the operating room, in the emergency room, they all use humor. I don't want to say as a defense mechanism, but a way to sort of cope with a lot of those situations. And I think
Mhm.
using it in leadership is no different. One thing we haven't talked about that I think is worth is knowing your own blind spots. You sort of said you know your own leadership style, but also your sort of blind spots in your leadership style. If you are someone who is ultra competitive in sports, you probably shouldn't take your team out to play a game of flag football in that you will be tackling people and you don't have like, you know what I mean? Like knowing your
Yeah,
own blind spots of like, okay, I know that when I start ribbing on people, I can go too far. So, okay, I'm
yeah.
not going to do that. That is not going to be part of my leadership style. I know that I don't do well when playing board games and I'm the person who flips over Monopoly at the end and says, I quit. Maybe you shouldn't have that as your part of your leadership style. But knowing your own sort of characteristics, like you're saying, you know, in your own leadership style, maybe, and trying to incorporate fun in a way that really, like you said, and this really hits home, that is authentic, that is who it really gives them insight into who you are as a person, who you are as a leader, and really helps to solidify the team. Because, like we talked about in previous episodes, if you try to fake it, people will know. Like it's just something they can smell, something they
Yeah,
can see. And if you're not being authentic, even when you're trying to inject humor and fun, it won't work. Just won't
yeah,
work.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think with all of leadership, the things that we talk about, that authenticity is vital. Um, so, I think that's something that we can continuously reinforce for ourselves and for our listeners. You gotta play within your capabilities,
Mm,
not what somebody else's capabilities are. There's certain people, like I have a friend, dear friend, Brian Ebel, okay? And you know Brian. And Brian is
mhm,
one of those people that just is an extraordinarily likable person, okay? And he's really exceptionally good with kids, and so I'm thankful that he's a pediatric cardiologist, and he's great with families, and he is able to do a lot of things that I don't do as well. But I can't play to Brian's strengths. I have to play to my strengths and vice versa, right? So the same comes with fun. It's got to be, I mean, if you're doing something that you think is not fun, you're not going to be fun doing it. And that's going to make it not fun for everybody,
mhm.
right? So it's got to be something that you enjoy doing, but as you say, recognizing your limitations. If you're that hyper competitive person, then maybe you need to steer clear of those sorts of events or things. If you are somebody who the sarcasm knob can get turned up really quickly and be piercing and things of that nature, probably want to avoid that. But there are a lot of different things that other folks can do. So I think I agree with you. I think that's really important. There was this idea that came to my mind, and I touched on it a little bit earlier, but I want to come back to it just because things aren't going to be fun all the time. There are going to be times that just aren't fun, right? I mean, if for you, it's that kid who surgery didn't go well, they're going on to ECMO or whatever or here's a kid with acute fulminant myocarditis, and you're trying to do something and you know that, I'm gonna intubate this kid, this is gonna go south, right? Like, the odds of it going south are really high, right? That's not fun. Those times are not fun. Everybody's stressed to the max. It's not fun. Those episodes will come, and they may come in waves, they may come intermittently, they may come rarely, but they will come, and there will be times of challenge and hardship when life and our leadership just aren't fun. But I think those crucibles are overcome through the relationships, that trust, that camaraderie, the esprit de corps that we talked about. When we've built that up beforehand through the fun, through the relationship, then that makes us able to get through those crucibles. So in a sense, as we're forming those relationships, and as we've discussed throughout this episode, fun is an essential part of that. As we're forming those relationships, it's in my mind, it's kind of like dropping some money in your piggy bank, right? You're
Mhm.
putting money in the bank so that when the crucible comes and it's not fun whatsoever, you can fall back on, hey, we've built the relationships and we can keep moving forward together. So I think that's a really important point, and I think that's how great teams achieve greatness, really.
We've sort of defined it, we've given the science behind it, and we've given some practical points. And what I'm hearing through all of this is that humor, fun, it is a tool. And it is a tool in leadership. It is one you need in your toolbox. You need in your toolbox. But like any tool, you need to know when, where, and how to use it. Can I hit in a nail with a $400 impact driver? Yep. Probably not the right thing to do. Probably not going to help, and probably going to be worse. And humor and fun are sort of like that. Like you said, like there's times where humor belongs and fun belongs, and there's times where it can build up a team and bring a team together and really invest in the team that is going to pay long-term dividends. And there's times where it can, like a hammer, it can be used to build or it can be used to break down. And you can
Yeah.
break down members of your team. And
Mhm.
not only break down that member, but everybody seeing you break down that member of your team, it's gonna break that relationship too, because 'cause they're everything we go back to, trust, character, integrity, that goes against that.
Yeah.
Like, you may think you're building something by doing an inside joke here or berating that person or using sarcasm here, but eventually it'll be to the detriment of the team. So, I'm sort of stuck and left with humor, fun. It's a tool. It can be a weapon if used inappropriately, but is really something that every great leader needs in their toolbox.
I agree 100%. And I think that that's a great way to end out this episode because I don't have a whole lot more to add to that. So I think this has been a great conversation about the importance of fun, what that means, what it looks like, the value of it, the science behind it, and the practical points on it. So, Justin, thanks for a great conversation. Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.